And therefore, this is how we get to know what happened to Minot and where he was and who he took on board his ship. Well, the ship then sailed down the Fear River and went around to Cape Hatteras, and of course there was a big storm. And the storm caused the oil kerosene drums to roll in the ship, and everything caught on fire. And so the ship was going down. Practically everyone on board died, just suffocated from the fire that was on the ship. But Minot and a few others got into a lifeboat. But it just so happened the lifeboat went under the ship and it sunk. And so Minot died. And 10 years later, a young man appears in a hospital in London. And he happened to be one of the soldiers from Illinois. And he writes a letter back to his father and tells him how he was there with the sinking of the ship. And he tells his story, which is a little bit, well, that's just his story anyway, that he told his father, that he survived the sinking, and he and another soldier sailed, and finally the other person died, but he made it to an island. What island, he never says. And he says that he was a prisoner on the island. Now, what island was he a prisoner? We don't have no idea. For 10 years, he was a prisoner on this island. Finally, a British ship, a ship that had guns and was used during the war, but since then the British had used it for other things, amongst which was carrying prisoners. And this soldier boarded the ship, landed in London, and wrote his letter home to his father. And so that's sort of a good ending to the whole story of Minot and his adventures at the Cape Fear and the Wilmington, North Carolina. This room still was used by other people later on. We now come and take a better look at the room itself. We now have this mantle. Now this mantle was added on later on in the late, when the Fennesseys owned the house, and the Fennessey and their family lived here in this house. And he had this built, and the Fennesseys came in the late 1930s. This room was used before then by the Armstrongs. Marie Armstrong came and owned the house. She had to do something to earn her living too. So she made this room an antique room where she sold antiques, and it was called a stepping stone. And she kept it on for a while with her, and then even her sister-in-law, Helen, became a little partner in this house, in this room. And later on, the house was sold, and it was rented to a Hamilton family. And Mrs. Hamilton, when she got the house, decided to make some kind of living, and she turned this room into what was called, they called it a tea room, but it was more than just a tea room, and she called it the Hamilton House. And she advertised. The Hamilton House was advertised in magazines, and she even had a postcard, and with specific directions of how to get to this house, so and you could come and you can have breakfast for 50 cents, and you can have lunch and dinner for $1. And the story goes that a very famous person who lives in Connecticut visited the house. We have no documentation on it, but the story goes that Katharine Hepburn, who of course was a famous actress who lived in Connecticut, visited the Hamilton House. Then we have, of course, we look at the actual pictures on the wall, the pictures, and we have this picture, and this painting, and this one here. These three paintings belong to Mrs. Harriet North, who was the historian of the city of West Haven, and these were purchased at the auction by one of our members when Harriet North's items were put up for auction. And this particular person bought them and had them restored, and we have them in our house. According to Harriet North, this was Mr. and Mrs. Wilcox. Whether that was any connection to the Wilcox Pier in Savin Rock, we don't know, but she called them Mr. and Mrs. Wilcox. And these paintings were about 1834, 1835 paintings. And this was supposedly Samuel Jones, who was some relation to Harriet North. This is the West Haven Literary Society. In the picture is Adrian Heitmann II. He was a member of this society. And some of this furniture, pieces of the furniture, came from the Fatherly family, who were descendants from the Walker family. With this room, we predominantly tried to make it more Civil War and Victorian. And so we have, in the Victorian period, horsehair cloth was very prevalent. And we have very fortunate to have a horsehair couch here. We do have some swords in our corner over here, one of which happens to be a naval sword. Another one we think belonged in the cavalry in the Civil War, and a few others that may be more connected more with the Spanish-American War. This is the original cupboard of this room too. And now in this particular period of time, you know, they have to have some kind of entertainment. Nowadays we have our videos and we have our laptops and our cell phones and so forth. But in the early days, they had this, which was a stereoscope. And what they would do, there were also stereoscopic views. And you would purchase these actually in a Sears Roebuck catalog of 1902. You could buy these. You can buy the stereoscope and you can buy the stereoscope prints. They were photos and they were put on a heavy cardboard, and you could buy them in color or in black and white. I think, and they were bought in packages of 12. You could buy a whole package of 12. I think one was, if it was black and white, it was 26 cents. If it was colored, it was 50-something cents. And this was used as you would do it here, put them here, and you would view them, and that was a sort of form of entertainment. And we have one of these here.